Welcome. Tonight we are having it's going to be exciting because, of course, we're going to talk about starter for corn. We have Troy Ingram and Laura Thompson who are going to talk to us tonight. Troy, I'll let you say the counties you're from because I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. And then Laura will do the same when she starts. If you have questions, please type them into the chat and we will read them out so we can get those answered for you. So we're going to go ahead and take off.
I'll get started. My name's Troy Ingram. I'm a cropping systems educator up in Howard County, Nebraska. I've got 8 counties in my accountability region up here: Garfield, Loop, Wheeler, Howard, Sherman Valley, Greeley, and Custer County. So I run around in quite a few counties up here in central Nebraska. Tonight we're going to start off talking a little bit about starter fertilizer and on-farm research. I've done a few starter fertilizer trials up on our own farm, and we're going to get into that here right now. So there's several benefits that we could get from applying starter fertilizer to corn. Of course, increased early growth, crop uniformity. We could have earlier flowering, crop maturity, and possibly dry down, and we hope to get a bump in yield. We hope to not be doing all this for nothing. So also, I just wanted to hit on why we decided to participate in the on-farm research program. We were curious if the starter fertilizer itself paid. It's just one more thing to have on the planter. It's one more thing to mess with when you're already overloaded. Is it worth the effort to do all that? I've had a lot of friends and family tell me that they are dropping starter, not using it, it's not worth it. And I didn't know for sure. We've always done it this way, so that's why we kept doing it. Right now, you got to analyze, every one of your inputs to see if they're paying or not in this kind of an economy. So a little bit about our farm. We do farm up in Greeley County, Nebraska. We've got irrigated corn, soybeans. We also raise some wheat and some rye, depending on the year, possibly oats and alfalfa. We've got a cow-calf herd also that we play with up there. So we do keep fairly busy. This was an on-farm research project, like I said earlier. It was a starter comparison. We don't farm a lot of acres, so we don't have a lot of real big fancy equipment to do it with, but we're running a Case International 900 series planter. Like I said earlier, we're up here in Greeley County, Nebraska. Just wanted to throw a map up there so you guys had an idea where we were at. Our particular setup, we're running a 12-row 30 planter. We're putting on about 50 to 70 pounds of N at planting time. And then the remainder of our nitrogen goes on through the pivot, through either 3 or 4 different applications throughout the growing season between about V6 and VT. We've even started adding a shot after tassel here the last couple of years. We do put 5 gallons of 1034O and a quart of zinc in furrow. That's the only starter that we do use. In this particular study, you can see here on the screen, we just had a block that we had on one of our irrigated quarters. We planted 12 rows with starter, and then we just came back and we planted 12 rows without starter, and we did that for 4 different replications. We do have a 6-row corn head, so we did combine out the 6 middle rows, hopefully to alleviate that possible edge effect with the starter. So we wanted to get a decent sample there. So this particular farm is really highly variable with the soil type. We've got everything from a Valentine fine sand to a Gates silt loam. We do grid sample every 4 years. I pulled this particular sample here just so you get an idea of what our fertility levels were like. These particular points were the points that were around and in our study. You can see our organic matter runs from 0.5% up to about 1%. So very low organic matter. Our P levels are pretty good, you know, averaging 30 to 40. Our K levels are a little on the low side, I think. You can see kind of what we're dealing with there for fertility. When we harvested this, we did use a weigh wagon. We do not have a yield monitor on our particular combine. The results were basically the check with no starter. We had around 201 bushel per acre yield, and then with the starter we had a 214. So we did have a significant difference there in yield. So the one thing that I wish we could have done, we had all hopes of doing this for 3 different years, and we're going to try to keep doing it. We want to do this at least 2 more years. In 2019, we were just unable to with how the weather hit us that year. So, and I guess that's all I've got on my particular study there. I think Laura's got some more information for us on starter fertilizer, and I'll be able to take questions if there are any after she gets through. So thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Troy. If you do have questions as we go along, please just go ahead and type those into the chat there. You should be able to access a chat box within Zoom and just type in your questions so that we can get those answered. I'm going to share some of the summary results that we've had from multiple different starter fertilizer studies that have gone on in the On-Farm Research Network. Okay, so the studies were conducted from 1997 to 2019. We had a total of 19 on-farm research studies that we're going to summarize the results for today. So Troy had a great example of a study, and so my goal is just kind of share in more aggregate what some of those studies have showed for results over the years. So these studies were conducted in Lancaster, Saunders, Richardson, York, Burt, and Clay counties. The ones that we're looking at here were all studies that looked at 1034.0 as the starter fertilizer source. We of course have different people looking at different types of starter fertilizer as well, but for uniformity for this aggregate look at studies, we've just looked at those that were using 1034.0. The rates that people used ranged from 3 to 6 gallons per acre, and then a few of the studies did also contain 1 quart of zinc. So some of those did have that as well. So here we have the results looking at all of those 19 studies combined. And what we've done is broken this up by the soil phosphorus level, the soil Bray P1 that you can see across the bottom. So we've kind of grouped these into 3 different categories. On the left, you see where we had low soil phosphorus. Those were sites that had about 0 to just under 10 parts per million. And then we have our moderate part per million, or soil phosphorus part per million, which would be about 10 to 20. And then what we are grouped here is the high soil phosphorus, and that's going to be about 20 and up. So looking at those, when we look at the lower soil P levels, we see that on the left, and that we've got on average about 14.3 bushel per acre. So that's what you're seeing there of those 4 data points on the left. In the middle, where we have our moderate soil P levels, we saw a yield increase for using starter of about 2.6, and then that decreased even more as we moved into the higher, even higher soil phosphorus levels. So down to about 0.3 bushels per acre. You can see the range. We did have some sites that were up to about 5 bushels per acre increase, but a number that just had no response at all. So that's kind of a summary of what we've seen with 19 different studies over the years. We've also developed this tool that you see here. This is just a way that you can kind of explore some of that data for yourself. So at the top here, you've got a slider. You can adjust which parts per million range you're interested in. Maybe you know that your fields are all pretty low. And so you want to adjust the slider down and see just the average yield for that parts per million that's most representative of your fields. When you use this tool, it's online. I'll show you the URL here in a second, but you can hover over these points and see different information about the sites as well. And then we do have the critical levels marked for you as well on here. Off to the right side, we've just put together a little quick calculator for you. You can enter your soil P level. Here I have 15 parts per million, what you expect a starter fertilizer cost to be per acre, and your expected corn price per bushel. And just based on the data that you see here in the chart, it's going to calculate based on this data what we'd expect the yield increase to be, and then based on the information that you put in on prices, what that expected ROI might be. So that's just another tool that's available to you to do some exploring on your own. The link for that is at go.unl.edu/starter tool. We're also posting all of the resources from these sessions as well as the recording of these sessions online at our Streaming on Farm Research website, and we'll put that in the chat for sure as well so that you can access that that way too. So overall, I think we've got a nice set of data that we're able to see a really pretty consistent trend in starter fertilizer response related to the soil phosphorus levels. Hopefully that gives you kind of a good idea, knowing where you're at, where your fields are at. Great to go out and take some soil samples, see where you're at, and kind of look at what you might expect for a response to starter fertilizer. Of course, you can also do tests for yourself with the On-Farm Research Network, just like Troy shared his on-farm research study. So whether your question is related to a starter fertilizer is paying, if you're interested in looking at different sources of starter fertilizer, different formulations, all those questions are ones that make really good on-farm research studies, and we usually have a lot of people interested in doing those, so we'd be happy to help get that set up for you if that's something you're interested in. So that's what I had to share as kind of a summary. I'll turn it back over to you, Megan.
Okay, so if you have, let's see, questions, please type them in the chat box. But what we would like you to do is if you could please go to slido.com, and if you could please do a quick survey. It's just about what you've learned tonight and just a way to evaluate it. And the event code is OFR1. So please do that, and then go ahead and share those questions in the chat box. Okay, Troy, there's a question for you. So why do you think you had a yield response on your plot? And then where were the zinc levels low? Or were zinc levels low, sorry.
Yes, our zinc levels are on the lower side. We do apply zinc as a micronutrient. I wondered if it wasn't a lot of it due to our sandy soils, low organic matter and that sort of thing. This particular quarter was one that was always planted to forage and chopped, and it was either forage or it was in alfalfa, so there was always a lot of removal of stover and everything. So it's just a theory, but I wondered if it wasn't just the rundown state of our soils. We've been trying to build that up for the last 10 years, just with no-till and trying to be a lot better stewards than what it used to be.
So a follow-up to that is, do you think it was a zinc effect or P2O5?
And honestly, I'm just not sure. I'm not an agronomist. I'm more of an ag engineer. So that's something I would have to defer to somebody who is a little more well-versed in soils than I am.
Aaron or Laura, would you like to add any comments for that last one?
If we look at those levels where Troy was at in the 30 to 40, typically we wouldn't expect to have a phosphorus response. UNL's recommendation is usually anything over 25 ppm. We shouldn't really need any phosphorus at all, but there's always a chance, right? You do get a response.
Okay, there is
Are you
another
hearing me now,
question in the
Megan?
chat box. Does the use of starter fertilizer have a negative or positive effect on uptake of other nutrients?
I'm not sure I've seen really any true data on that either way. I think the one thing you could always say is sometimes we'll get better root growth potentially with some starters. Maybe that would help the uptake of other nutrients, but I can't say I can say either way on that. Megan or Laura or Troy, you have anything else on that?
Just that most of the information related to if starter does positively or negatively affect uptake is related just to stimulation of root growth, like Aaron was saying. So when it comes to studying roots, that is very challenging, especially in a field setting, but very good and interesting question. So keep them coming. Troy, what was the cost per acre of the starter fertilizer that you applied?
Well, if I could get to my sheet, I could find that for you, because I don't have that right off the top of my head.
Hey, Troy, I just pulled up your on-farm research report from it, and what you had down was $16.41 per acre for the starter product. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds close. I had in my mind 14 to 15 bucks, but I couldn't quite remember for sure. Thanks, Laura.
Yep.
There's another question. Troy, what would be your advice for someone who is wanting to implement this on their farm, and how time consuming was the setup?
For me, since this was just comparing, starter versus no starter, it was very easy to set up. I can control the starter from the cab of the tractor, so it was just a matter of flagging off the plot and remembering to shut things off and turn them back on. So it wasn't time consuming at all for this particular study.
And Laura has a question on Facebook.
Yeah, it looks like we've got a couple here. One, have there been any studies comparing multiple rates of starter and looking at effects of those different rates rather than just looking at starter versus no starter?
Seems like I recall a couple that did look at some different rates, but that'd be a really good, if you go into our website, I'm sure we could search for that and look through that. Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't remember. But.
Yeah, I'd say maybe it's a little more common that we're having people compare different products with different formulations. So a different formulation or type of starter compared to maybe something just like 1034-0, maybe a little more common than the different rates, but we do have all of our research results posted online. And if you go to resultsfinder.unl.edu, I don't know if you want to add that as well, Megan, that's where you can do some searching and filtering. So just select in the topic drop down that you want to look at fertility and soil management, and then you can select a subtopic of starter fertilizer and see all of the studies that have been conducted on that. So beyond the 19 that I showed you that were all comparing 1034-0 to a check or a control, there's also many others looking at different rates or different products.
Troy, yeah, one more for you. There was a question on if you had advice for someone starting out, what would be your number one piece of advice to get going doing on-farm research?
Well, I would make sure that if you're comparing more than one product, to make sure it was randomized and replicated like we like to see. Also make sure you do it more than 1 year, and that's something that we're gonna try to do on this starter fertilizer study also. We want to continue it for multiple growing seasons, just because there's so many variables throughout the year. So
okay, Laura, Aaron, Troy, anything else you want to add?
I think this on-farm research program is just a great thing to get into. It's just allowing guys to do some research on their own place under their own management with their own equipment, with some help getting the project started. I see nothing but benefits from it. So I think Laura has done a great job, and Keith Gluen also getting this program, or keeping it running, I guess. So.
Okay, well, with that, we want to say a big thank you to Laura and Troy for presenting today, and also for Aaron for pitching in with our questions. We will be back on next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. Hopefully you can join us then. We are going to have Chris Proctor to talk about interseeding cover crops. So we'll talk about that next week. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and I think that's all we have.